So for the last 2 years I've been working with a company called Team Rock. They were a music media company who decided that games and interactive media was the future because printing words on magazines on dead trees was not really going anywhere. When I arrived, they had a game in progress which was called Metal Hammer Beat Zerker, and you ran down an endless road and killed demons with a gigantic metal hammer. It was awful. It was broken, it didn't work. And I had an entire presentation on the salvage efforts that it took to take that horrible, stinking, broken piece of crap away from the developer who shall remain nameless until my GDC talk, when I stand a chance of being in the same room with the bastard, and turn it into a game which was actually releasable. However, it was pointed out to me by my wife that the American company is probably quite litigious. And much as I love you guys, being sued is not my idea of a good time. So we're going a slightly different way. Over the last 11 years, I have dealt with pretty much all of the development studios in Scotland. I have worked with over 150 companies as a freelancer, as an independent PR, marketing, writer, business development kind of guy within the game sector. And there are a number of common themes which are coming through. Now, I'm delighted to say that many of the points that Jesper made at the beginning don't actually contradict me in any way. I have used slightly more cat gifs than you, but and no references whatsoever. But there are certain restrictions and limitations that the games industry, the games sector are running into time and time again that I think it's very important that we understand and that we address. Now, this is not to say games cannot be art. Games can be art. Is anyone in disagreement with that? Good, because we would have to fight. And this is not having a pop at indie game developers, okay? I understand the sector is large enough to accommodate many people. There are people out there who are wonderful human beings who want to do games to make the world a better place or because it is their passion. Not everybody is doing this to make it their livelihood, and I understand that. However, the biggest single issue we face as an industry, especially here in Scotland, is sustainability. We had over 100 games companies in 2013. By 2015, we had lost, by my count, around about 35 of them. Not because they were crap, because they couldn't actually come up with nice ideas, but in a lot of cases because they didn't actually know how to run a company. So let's look at some of the fallacies that are prevalent in the game sector. Number one, you know what makes a good game. Hands up everyone here who's a gamer. Hands up everyone who thinks they know what a good game is. Oh, interesting. Hands up everyone who thinks that Candy Crush Saga is an awesome game. The rest of you are wrong. 65 million players around the world. We've got maybe 3 in this room. I don't care if you don't like Candy Crush Saga, but if you can't look at it and appreciate why this has become King's biggest revenue generator and one of the biggest breakout games of the last decade, you're doing it wrong. Number 6. Oh, by the way, I did have this in a big list that I've been growing over the last 2 years, but when I came to actually prioritise them, I realised that my own priorities had changed. So, number 6, game developers think that their job is to make the game. Now, clearly, a part of your job is to make a game, otherwise you're not a game developer. But that ignores every other part of the process. Who's going to do the business development? Who's going to carry out the marketing? Who's looking after your community? Who's going to do the graphic design? Where are you going to get the music from? Jamie might be busy. Who's going to get it out there? Who's going to decide how the player interacts with this game and how at some point you may make some money or be featured in an exhibition? The chances are it's the poor sod that was at the bar getting the drinks when 5 minutes. Seriously. It was the poor sod at the bar getting the drinks when you decided that you were a games company because he's got to stand up, walk away from the monitor and do something other than make a game. Number 13. Release equals success. Getting your game to the market does not necessarily mean that you have won the game development competition. A very large part of your job should be deciding when you have hit the wall and this prototype, this idea, this concept ain't worth it. Too many studios disappear because they continue trying to push something that is either going to cost a huge amount of money, take all of the resources, or that they can't actually market anyway. Or, and you might have to whisper this, their idea wasn't very good in the first place. Number 4, grim acceptance of your business model, if indeed you have one, and this comes into what Dr. Whittaker was talking about earlier. Free-to-play. Oh, free-to-play is killing the games market. It's killing the industry. It's exploiting children. Yeah, the way you do it, Electronic Arts have really ripped the arse, if you'll forgive the technical expression, out of the free-to-play market. Charging you endlessly is not what free-to-play was all about. Free-to-play was supposed to give you access to a game, and if you like it, you will come back at some point and pay money. You hope. It's a really hard business model, especially if you're used to retail, where you get the money up front, and then if the consumer doesn't like your game, you don't care. You've got the cash. But far too many developers go, well, it's got to be free-to-play because that's the paradigm. Nobody's looking at innovating within that. The fact that free-to-play is dying in favour of incentivized advertising is something that every game developer should know and every game developer should be taking into account. And how do you combine the two? Business models do not have to be standalone, discrete, and arbitrary. You can do an awful lot. And number 2, you think you're game developers. Okay, clearly you're doing something which you think is a game, but if you've got all of this technical expertise, all of this creativity, and you're working in markets where other forms of content are available, maybe you should be looking at some of these other forms of content. The gentleman to my right mentioned gamification and then spat on the floor afterwards. Gamification can be thought of as loyalty. Gamification can be thought of as engagement. Why aren't you taking the expertise and the passion that you pour into your game and putting it into something else? One of the reasons Team Rock is no longer here is that the games team were basically kept making games. As a result, the radio app sucked, and it didn't have to. We could have used all the experiences, all of the lessons that we learned in games and applied it to the rest of the company's output. Most of the money being soaked up in the interactive media and digital projects world is being soaked up by people like this, digital design agencies. Look at this disgrace. He's got an ironic hat on, for the love of God. We empower visionaries to lead meaningful brands. Admittedly, you would choke on your own vomit, but you could be getting the money that they're making and spending on ironic hats and MacBooks. Think beyond games. Your choice of platform is similarly, more often than not, arbitrary. You're putting it out on iOS, are you? Why? Because iOS makes more than Android. Yeah, it's also about 4 times as tough to make money. It's a much smaller market. It doesn't have the piracy issue that Android does, but your game's revenue model doesn't actually discourage piracy. Piracy is a marketing move. Too many companies are deciding to put a game on a platform because they either like the platform, they're familiar with it, or because that's where all the other games are. 14. Game development is different. Is it? Is it? Everyone thinks games are special. Look at this picture of a nice high growth, yeah, you're going to be lucky, 1 minute. Look at this picture of a nice young high growth technology startup compared to this picture of a game development studio, or possibly a game development studio versus a nice young high growth tech startup. Do you notice many similarities? All the computers, all the young people, all clustered around being creative. If you're interested, by the way, the only way, having gone through this, that you can tell the difference is that the game studio people, all wearing free t-shirts. High growth tech startup, they're wearing shirts. There's a reason they're making 4 times as much money as the game studios. Number 7, your audience, your players, the people who are so important. They're not a single entity. If you've done any research into games at all, you'll be aware that there are different types of player. Right? There are different kinds of player. There's the aggressors, there's the planners, the scientists, the networkers, the opportunists. And more companies on the top end of the market, the MMOs and the AAAs, are having to take that into account and cater for these players if they're going to actually succeed in the long term. But far too few companies also think about the number of people who are ever going to give you any money ever, under any circumstances. Minnows and whales. Right? A very small number of people will give you a ridiculous amount of money, mostly if they're under the age of 16, if you're unethical and give them the ability to do so. But you can make as much from your whales as you can from your minnows. But you need to be aware that your audience is not one faceless lump of players who all do the same thing. I would classify myself, and a horrible phrase, I know, but I'm post-core. I still like console games. But I've got about 15 minutes a week that I can sit down and relax and play something. Right? I can't even get into a Quest. I don't play games online because I simply don't have the time. And where are the games companies catering for that kind of market? Number 5, you guys know what your players want, don't you? Of course you do. Your game developers, your players want what you give them. Difficulty levels. Making it harder and harder for them to actually do stuff. This comes back to post-core. Really? You want me to spend longer and longer to achieve more? This all goes back to a really ridiculous fallacy. Does anyone know what this game is? Okay, right, good. We need the coffee, Matt. The top right-hand corner, the 3 little ships at the top, what are those? I'll give you a clue. There's a word next to it. Those are your lives. You got 3 lives in Space Invaders. As you shot Space Invaders, what happened? They got faster and faster. Why did they get faster and faster? They got faster and faster to kill you. Why did they want to kill you? Because you lost a life. And what happened when you lost all 3 lives? You put in more money. It was a really nice, self-contained business model that worked in arcades. You see, if I've shelled out 60 quid for a game, you don't have to do that to me. Why do we still do it? Because game developers. And the final one that I thought was the final one, your job ends when the game is released. No. If you have a successful game, and you better pray you have a successful game, you better be prepared to be supporting it in 5 years, possibly 10 years. Subway Surfers on iOS came out from a Danish publisher called Baglow back 5 years ago. And it's really nice, simple. You run left and right, you jump over trains. 5 years later, it's still going. It's still being updated. It's still getting new players. It shows exactly what you need to be thinking of, even as the smallest developer. And number 8, ignoring analytics. If you're not using analytics, you don't deserve to call yourself a software company, let alone a game developer. If you don't know your monthly averages, your daily averages, you don't know where players are dropping out, you don't know the choke points, you don't know what bits of your game suck, you can't fix them and make them better. And you're not going to be around for very long. And far, far, far too many developers ignore the reality of the games sector and the evolution of the medium. They want things to go back to the way they were when they understood them. They want things to go back to when it was easy, when people gave you 60 quid up front for a game. Unfortunately, that's not the case anymore, right? It sounds like it's really miserable, but this is actually the reality. There are new opportunities opening up in the game sector like never before, but far too many developers are closing their eyes to it and thinking that mobile is killing the games industry. Free-to-play is killing the games industry. Casual games are killing the games industry. To my certain knowledge, the games industry has been on the edge of peril constantly for the last 20 years because something else is going to kill it. But then, on the other hand, you need to be aware of the realities. You know, the app era may be drawing to a close. It's the fact that we now have an awful lot of new technologies coming to the market is something you need to be paying attention to. Unfortunately, most companies seem to be getting carried away and getting all fizzy about things like virtual reality, which is as yet unproven. And most companies are ignoring things like the Alexa and the AIs and the chatbots, which have huge installed bases but aren't quite as sexy. Number 11, here's the big one. You work in the games industry. No, you don't. You work in the entertainment industry. And these guys are not coming knocking on your door when they want things made, and they should be. Anyone here used action movie effects? J.J. Abrams' Bad Robot did a little augmented reality game, arguably, back in 2013-14. App of the year, according to Apple. It's making them a huge amount of money. It's now a marketing tool for all of his projects. And it was done by a digital design studio, not a games company. It's like, get out beyond the games industry and go and talk to people. And here's my personal bugbear. If you tell people about your game before it's ready, they'll steal your idea. The biggest issue facing developers these days is obscurity, not piracy. If your concept is good enough to be pirated, you're very lucky, because the chances are nobody outside 3 of your friends and your mum will ever care about the game that you've made. And my final one, the one that I would encourage everybody to just have it carved and engraved and tattooed onto their skin. The fact that you think about business models and revenue streams or sustainability does not make you a sellout. It makes you a responsible game developer that you might be around in a little while. When Valve released Half-Life 2, rather than sort of go, oh, we'll go with Electronic Arts for the distribution, they went out on a limb and did something a bit weird. It seems to have worked out okay. I'm not saying you have to go in and create the next Steam, but there are opportunities there that didn't exist even 2 years ago. Please, please think beyond the usual standards and genres. It is the best of times. It is the blurst of times. It's really challenging. Getting an app onto the app market is really difficult. It's very simple, but getting recognised, getting seen is really, really hard. The technology to make games is out there. It's simpler and easier and quicker to make a game than it's ever been. But it's harder and harder to make money out of it. All I'm saying, all I'm asking you, all I'm begging you guys is to not get caught up in the status quo and think that games are the way that games are because that's the way that games are. We can do better, we must do better if we want to actually move beyond our little bubble and take over the rest of the creative industries as is our God-given right. That's it. Thank you.